Hello, welcome to Stories in Time. My name is Eloise Schottler. I have a story for today. I'm going to be taking a long trip coming up for me, going to Europe. And I'm thinking about it, making your plans. You have to do that. It's not just packing, it's getting ready to go. And that's where it comes in hard for me. I'm not a comfortable flyer. And this is going to be a long flight, going and coming. And it brought to mind a story that I've been telling for a long time, but I haven't told it for a while. Maybe it'll give me some comfort. When I start to fly, I think about being on a 747 on the tarmac at LAX one morning for the 8 o'clock flight. It was early. The sun was bright, but it was soft in the morning out there. And all of a sudden, this little kid, standing on his seat right in front of Jim and me, called out, "Okay, guys, let's get going." Now, that's the kind of flyer I would like to be. But I'm not, and I'm admitting it. I'll tell you, I am not. And I read shortly after that, I read in the paper, maybe you remember it, that someone sued JetBlue because they made them sit on the toilet all the way to their destination. That wouldn't have happened if I had been on that plane. I will assure you of that, because I am a watcher. I am. I get on a plane, I'm going to see everything that's going on, and I am a watcher. You could depend on me. Nothing slips by me. I get on early. I make up reasons for why I have to get on the plane early. I've been doing that for years. Now I just rent a wheelchair, and they put me on early because I want an aisle seat where I can see everything. I can't effectively watch if I can't see everything, and I know that the passengers, even though they don't realize it, are counting on me. Well, that has worked for me for a long time, and I learned that lesson a number of years ago on a small plane. I think it was a 727, maybe it was even another number, I'm not sure. But it had 2 seats on either side of a single row that went all the way down the center of the plane. And I was sitting in my front row aisle seat, watching everything carefully as they got on through the doorway, the little teeny aisle that they had to get through just at the cockpit, and then they go on to their seats. Well, I'm sitting there, and I noticed that another pilot had just gotten on. He was wearing the same uniform as the pilots that were flying. He said a few friendly words to the stewardess or flight attendant, and she put him into the extra seat in the cockpit. Well, a brother going. And so then I looked around. I stood up, actually, and looked and checked, and all the seats were being filled. There were not going to be any empty seats on this plane, and I heard someone running down the gangway, and he came in, and it was another pilot. Same uniform, another pilot carrying his baggage. And he stuck it in a closet, and she said, "Hello," and he stepped into the toilet. That is the honest truth. He stepped right into the toilet. And I watched all of this and looked around again. There wasn't an empty seat on that airplane. He must be planning to stay in the toilet. They closed the doors. Everything was buttoned up. They're getting ready to take off. And when I saw that, bing, I rang the bell. The stewardess, who'd just been getting ready to strap herself into her seat, looked at me, and she stood up and she came over and she said, "Well, madam, is there a problem?" I said, "That's what I'm wondering. Is there a problem here?" "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Is that pilot going to fly sitting on the toilet in that little teeny toilet room?" Well, I don't know what you're talking about. And she was just turning her back just to ignore me completely. And I said, just a minute, just a minute. And she came back and leaned over, and I said, you know, if you don't do something about this, and that pilot flies sitting on the toilet in there, I believe that that's against the law. And I will report it as soon as we land in Charlotte. Well, her eyes got big. She turned around. She went over and she knocked on the door for the cockpit and stuck her head in. And there was a little bit of whispering. And the next thing I saw was that she came out, knocked on the toilet door, opened it up and whispered to whoever was in there. And then he emerged, picked up his baggage. She pushed the door open and he left. Right away, they closed the doors. She sat down, strapped herself in, and the plane began to move to take to the sky. I felt her eyes on me. I did. She was looking at me, and she didn't look friendly. And so I, edged around in my seat. I wasn't totally comfortable, and once we got to a good flying level, she unbuckled, and the first thing she did was walk over to my seat. And she leaned down and she said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean, who am I? I want to know right now, who are you?" I got it. She thought I was an inspector. Well, of course she did. I was wearing my Dress for Success suit. And I just said, let's just put it this way. I'm a flyer, and I don't like to fly with a pilot on the toilet. Let's leave it that way, and we'll just forget it for today. And she moved away, and we didn't speak for the hour-and-a-half flight to Charlotte. That's when I realized what a talent I had in being a watcher, for protection, to take care of people. But, I have other stories about that, but my favorite one taught me something very, very important. That sometimes there are others that are doing a better job. Jim and I were back at Los Angeles LAX airport for that early 8 o'clock flight. Another time, several years later, our daughter lived in Los Angeles, and we went out often to see her and our grandchildren. And we came into the little coffee shop, and we sat down to have a cup of coffee, get comfortable before it was time to board. And there was this man sitting not too far away, who was sitting in a wheelchair, pulled up to the table. And in front of him, he had held up his hand and dropped a string down right in front of him. And there was a large triangular-shaped crystal, heavy crystal on the bottom of that string, and he was letting it just back and forth, back and forth. Now, I'm interested in technology. I always have been. And I wondered if he was experimenting with a new kind of telephone device or something, and I wanted to know what it was. I was very curious about it, and so I sort of edged over toward him a little bit. "Where are you going?" Jim said. I said, "I just want to check that out, just a little bit. I won't intrude." And so I'm watching carefully, and then I noticed something else. He was just having that crystal shift back and front, back, and he was talking to it. He was talking to it. So I just leaned a little bit further, nearer to him. He was almost whispering, "Oh, hello, Father. Oh, you're there. I'm so glad to have gotten you on the phone. This is wonderful. I just have a few questions. You know who it is. It's me. Oh, I'm so glad you noticed that I was here. I'm flying home on the 8 o'clock flight. We get in at 4. And I want to be sure you're watching out for me. Are you? Oh, that's so good. I'm so relieved. That's so good. And fine, all right, thank you. Oh, just one thing more. Let me ask you just one more question. And he must have said, yes, go ahead. And then he looked at his crystal, and he looked at it seriously, and then he moved over a little bit closer to him, and he said, how is Jesus? Oh, I'm so glad he's doing well. I'm really happy to hear that. Now, don't forget, we get into Dulles this afternoon about 4 o'clock. Just watch out for me, please. Jim was leaning closer to me to say something like, would you please come back to the table? What are you doing? And I said, did you hear that? And he said, yes, as a matter of fact, I did hear that. Do you think he's crazy? Well, there's a good possibility. Jim's a psychiatrist, and I said, there's a good possibility that that could be at work, of course. But Eloise, I'd just like to point out one thing. Doesn't he look happy? I said, you know, he really does, doesn't he? He looks very calm, very happy. I was surprised. We boarded our plane, and he was sitting in an aisle seat at the front. I was surprised. He's on this plane flying in to Dulles to land at 4 o'clock. And I tugged on Jim's shirt and I said, do you see him? He's the one that's flying with us. He said, yeah, I saw that. That's good, isn't it? I said, yes, I think it is good. So I sat down in my seat and I looked around like a watcher does, checking everything. And then I realized I didn't have to do that today. There was somebody on this flight that had already turned this flight over to a higher power. I sat back, watched the movie, read, and had a great flight home. When we leave for Dulles, from Dulles in a week, I'm going to look around that plane and I'm going to try to do the same thing that he was doing that day. Because there are times when you just got to turn it over. Take care, come back. We'll have a new story next time you're here.